Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some ideas of flow. So, in the lecture last week, we were talking about flow and also why it might not be a thing or it's not specific enough. And some people were saying, well, it's all about subjective experience and it's hard to define, and you can play games that aren't challenging. And I think that this is all completely relevant. I think there is a bit of an issue between why do we play games? Is it for education? Is it for pure fun? Is it for social reasons? There are lots of reasons, and there are, in due course, lots of games that are satisfying but don't necessarily have much flow to them. And there are some things you can do in life which don't have flow. But my take is slightly different, which is that flow is just one is more complex than something which is kind of wholly good. And although the body and the brain receives it as wholly good in the moment, it can leave lots of kind of toxic remnants. And in some ways, it's too easy for us as people to go into this state of flow. And we can do it with extremely trivial things as well as with meaningful things. And so I think really the question with flow, which is not necessarily always being asked at the time, but should be asked more, is what is the kind of ethical and design implications, considering it is so easy using electronic devices to evince this state of absorption and pseudo or actual flow. So the example I would give for this is gambling, right? And I kind of feel like modern gambling, modern electronic gambling, which was written about in Natasha Dow Schull's book Addiction by Design, is kind of the dark side of the gaming industry. Not necessarily because it's done by the gaming industry, but more because the tools and techniques which were practiced by the gaming industry and refined in the arcades is what has allowed the proliferation of things like fixed odds betting terminals to create a lot of misery for people, because it takes advantage of the same kind of Skinnerian principles that the arcade machines do. Now, if you're not familiar with Skinnerian principles, B.F. Skinner was famous psychologist for kind of looking only at behavior. Didn't look at underlying motive particularly, just looked at behavior and how behavior could be shaped. And what he did often to control animals was something which was a reward schedule, right? So it would start with an animal being rewarded regularly for doing something. And then he would move on to what's called an inconsistent reward schedule. So, for instance, there were some pigeons in the box, and every time they tapped a button, they'd get food. But then after a while, he could just start giving the pigeons random pellets at a random time, and they would still keep pecking the button. And we can really see that with slot machines, right? Which is that people will continue to go, particularly if they've had a little bit of a winning streak. They'll just continue to go, whether they're getting rewarded or not. And actually, it was found that people who are very addicted to gambling when they're playing slot machines are actually often quite disappointed when they win, because it kind of presents a natural end point, and also because the payout takes time. They don't want to win and be rewarded with a lengthy payout. They actually just want to stay on the device. And this to me seems like something really, really important to understand, which is that people, once they're absorbed in something, no matter how trivial or how destructive it is, they may just want to stay there. And in some ways, this is flow, but this isn't flow with, satisfaction coming from manageable goals and, learning things and things being challenging. There's nothing challenging about a slot machine. It's dumb luck. But for all intents and purposes, it looks exactly the same as flow from the outside. It looks very, very similar. And in fact, it might feel very similar to the person playing it. So there might be a question, and I've been thinking about this a bit, which is roulette a game? Well, most people say playing the game of roulette, but of course there's no real skill in it. There's not a great deal of interactivity, unless you feel that you have agency over it, in which case there is a great deal of interactivity. Now, for someone who logically knows there's no difference between putting a token here or a token there, putting it on red or putting it on black for the roulette wheel, it might feel pointless. But for someone who really believes that they do have some agency, it might feel very pointful. And in fact, in casinos, they often show the last 8 spins on a roulette wheel in order to make people believe that there's some sort of pattern, which is what's called the gambler's fallacy. As Einstein said, God does not play dice. And so what this all leads back to is this idea of flow, which is, I think flow is very real. I think flow can be cultivated carefully by designers. And there's clearly some games that evince a great deal of flow. I would say some of the best ones are things like SimCity, which provide a real kind of insight into complex systems, make people think deeply, use a lot different parts of their brains, their aesthetic side and their logical problem solving side. But there's also games like Candy Crush all the way up to straight up betting, which would feel and look quite similar in an experiential sense, but are actually fundamentally quite different. And they may have a state of flow, but that flow is really quite different to what we'd get from other experiences. And so I think that my reflection on flow is, as designers, it is actually really quite easy to get something that either looks or feels like flow. But we need to use it ethically and we need to use it thoughtfully on our games and not just trap players in a series of Skinnerian reward cycles. So that's my thoughts, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.